Clara was sitting on the couch watching TV when Richard stormed in. After Eleanor whispered something in his ear, his expression turned dark with fury. He shouted, "Why are you wasting time?" and then smashed the TV over Clara's head. Blood streaming from her wounds, Clara cried for help as Richard dragged her by her hair and threw her out. Trembling, she managed to call Liam, but what awaited her was even more terrifying than she could have ever imagined. Clara Bennett never thought she'd live to tell the story she's about to share, one of love, betrayal, and finding strength in the face of unimaginable pain. If anyone had told her 3 years ago that she'd be recounting this experience, she would have laughed. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It all began when Clara met Richard Holt. At 26, she was living a simple, steady life in Seattle as a graphic designer for a small firm. Her world was calm and predictable until Richard, a charming 30-year-old banker, entered her life. He had a charisma that could brighten any room, always polite, well-spoken, and making her feel like the center of his universe. Their relationship grew quickly: fancy dinners, romantic walks along the waterfront, and endless hours of shared dreams. He seemed to be the perfect man, and when he proposed 6 months later, Clara didn't hesitate to say yes. Their friends dubbed them the perfect couple, and Clara believed it. But as she would soon realize, perfection is often nothing more than a facade. After the wedding, they moved into a beautiful home in a quiet Seattle neighborhood. For Clara, it felt like a dream come true. She devoted herself to making their house a home, cooking Richard's favorite dishes, and attending to every detail. Richard worked long hours at the bank, and while Clara missed him during the day, she convinced herself that it was all part of building their future. But soon, things began to unravel. Richard's mother, Eleanor, moved in just months after the wedding, claiming she wanted to help. But it quickly became apparent that her true intention was to control. Eleanor, a retired school teacher in her late 50s, had an air of authority that made her opinions about everything: how Clara should dress, how the house should run, and even what meals to cook feel like commands. At first, Clara tried to get along with her mother-in-law out of respect for her husband. She endured Eleanor's criticism, whether it was about her modern style or how she managed the household. Yet no matter how hard Clara tried, it was never enough. And worse, Richard began siding with his mother. "Clara, Mom's just trying to help," he would say when Clara voiced her concerns. "You should listen to her. She knows what she's talking about." It stung, but Clara tried to convince herself that it was just a phase. Things would improve, right? But they didn't. One particularly exhausting evening, after finishing all the housework, Clara sank into the couch to watch TV, one of the few things that gave her comfort. She thought about her late father, who had passed away a year before her wedding. The TV, a gift from him, always reminded her of the warmth and memories they shared. Richard came home late that night. Tired, but still offering her a smile, he entered the room. For a brief moment, Clara felt a sense of relief. Maybe, just maybe, tonight would be peaceful. But then, Eleanor appeared, whispering something into his ear. Whatever she said, it changed his expression instantly. He glared at her, his eyes cold. "Get up," he said, his tone sharp. "Go to the kitchen and make me a fresh meal." Clara blinked in surprise. "The dinner's already ready, Richard. I kept it warm for you." "I don't want that," he snapped. "I want something fresh now." She hesitated. She was tired, and she couldn't understand why he was being so unreasonable. "Richard, I've been on my feet all day. Can't you just—" Before she could finish, he exploded. "How dare you talk back to me?" He strode across the room, and before she could move, he grabbed the TV, her father's TV, and lifted it above his head. She didn't have time to react. He hurled it down, and the corner of it smashed into the side of her head. Pain erupted, and she crumpled to the floor, blood trickling down her face. She was too shocked to cry. She just stared at him, her vision blurred, her heart pounding. "Maybe this will teach you to obey me," he growled. Eleanor stood nearby, arms crossed, a smug expression on her face. "You don't deserve to live here if you can't respect us," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Clara begged for help, her voice trembling. "Richard, please, I'm hurt." But neither of them cared. Eleanor continued shouting at her, and Richard dragged her to the door. "Get out!" he spat, shoving her into the cold night. She stood there, bleeding and shaking, unable to process what had just happened. With nowhere else to go, Clara called her brother, Liam. As soon as he answered, she broke down. "Clara," he said, his voice sharp with concern. "What's wrong?" "Richard, I need help, Liam. Please." "Where are you?" he asked, his voice firm. "I'm coming to get you right now." She gave him her location and waited in the darkness, her mind a swirl of fear and disbelief. What had her life become? How had she ended up here? When Liam arrived, his face was a mix of anger and worry. He helped her into his car and drove straight to the hospital. "We're going to fix this," he said, gripping the steering wheel tightly. "I promise you, Clara, he's not going to get away with this." As the doctor tended to her wound, she felt a spark of something she hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. For the first time, she realized she didn't have to endure this anymore, but she also knew that this was just the beginning. Richard and Eleanor had betrayed her in ways she couldn't ignore, and she was going to make sure they paid for it. Sitting in the hospital that night, she couldn't stop trembling. The pain in her head was sharp, but it was nothing compared to the ache in her chest. As the nurse cleaned her wound and applied stitches, Liam sat by her side, fuming silently. She could see the anger radiating off him, but he held back his words, waiting until she was ready to talk. Once they got back to his apartment, he sat her down with a glass of water and said, "Clara, tell me everything. I need to know exactly what's been happening." She hesitated. Where could she even begin? But she knew she had to tell him, so she started from the beginning, recounting every instance of Eleanor's interference and Richard's growing coldness. She told him about how she tried to please them, how she hoped things would get better, and how it all escalated to that horrifying moment when Richard smashed the TV on her head. Liam listened intently, his fists clenched, his jaw tight. By the time she finished, he was seething. "He's a monster," Liam said, his voice low but full of rage. "And his mother is no better. Clara, you can't go back there, ever." "I know," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But what can I do? They've made it clear I don't belong there. I don't even have my belongings." "Forget your things," Liam said firmly. "What matters is your safety. We'll figure the rest out, but first, we're going to make sure they pay for what they've done to you." She nodded, feeling a mixture of fear and relief. For the first time in months, she felt like she wasn't alone. Liam was her rock, and she knew he wouldn't let her face this on her own. Over the next few days, she stayed with Liam, trying to recover both physically and emotionally. He helped her file for divorce, and while the process was daunting, it was also liberating. Cutting ties with Richard felt like regaining a part of herself that she'd lost, but she knew divorce wasn't enough. The anger and humiliation burned inside her, and she wanted justice. Richard and Eleanor had destroyed her trust, her confidence, and her sense of safety. She couldn't let them get away with it. One evening, sitting in Liam's living room, Clara spoke with a fierce determination. "I want to do more than just leave him. I want to expose who he really is." Liam, sensing the gravity of her words, studied her with narrowed eyes. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice quiet but concerned. "He's not the man he pretends to be," she replied, her voice shaking, but resolute. "I've always had this feeling that he's hiding something. The secrecy around his work, the long hours, the late-night phone calls, it doesn't make sense." Liam paused, thinking carefully before he nodded slowly. "You might be right. If he's hiding something, we'll find it. We need to dig deeper." It was then that they decided to hire a private investigator. Liam tracked down Sam Walker, a seasoned investigator known for getting results. When they met with Sam, Clara explained her suspicions about Richard's behavior at the bank. Sam listened attentively, took notes, and assured them that he would begin the investigation right away. The waiting was unbearable. Every day, Clara wondered what Sam would uncover. A part of her questioned whether she was overreacting, chasing after shadows, but the other part, the one that had endured Richard's lies and manipulation, knew something dark was lurking beneath his facade. 2 weeks later, Sam called. "I've found something," he said. "Can we meet?" Clara's heart raced as she and Liam made their way to Sam's office. Sitting down with him, Sam laid out the evidence. The truth was far worse than she had ever imagined. Richard wasn't just a controlling husband, he was a criminal. He had been embezzling money from the bank, laundering it through fake accounts, and funneling it into offshore holdings. Sam showed them documents, account statements, and even surveillance photos. It was irrefutable. Clara stared at the evidence, her mind spinning. "I knew he was hiding something," she murmured, "but this is massive." Liam's voice was firm as he spoke. "We're taking this to the authorities." Sam nodded, but with caution. "You should, but be careful. People like Richard don't take kindly to being cornered." A chill ran down Clara's spine, but she knew Sam was right. Richard was dangerous, and this was no longer just about her. His actions had hurt others, and she couldn't let him go on. The next day, Liam and Clara went to the police, bringing Sam's evidence with them. Detective Sarah Miller, the officer assigned to the case, listened intently as they presented everything. "This is solid," she said, flipping through the files. "We'll start an investigation immediately." As they left the station, Clara felt a mixture of fear, relief, and something new, a strange sense of power. For so long, she had felt trapped in an unending nightmare, but now she was fighting back. For the first time in a long time, she believed she might actually win. Little did she know, the battle was only beginning. The days after meeting Detective Miller blurred in a haze of nervous energy. The police had taken over the investigation, and Clara found herself constantly waiting for updates. Sam's warning echoed in her mind. Richard is dangerous. She had always known about Richard's temper, but now she saw him in a whole new light. This wasn't just about his cruelty toward her, it was about a man who broke the law, betrayed trust, and lived a double life. She tried to keep herself busy, distracting herself with anything she could. Liam remained her pillar of support, checking in on her and constantly reassuring her that she wasn't alone. Yet even his comforting words couldn't quell the anxiety gnawing at her. She knew that once Richard discovered what was happening, there would be no turning back. About a week later, Detective Miller called her in for a meeting. When Liam and she arrived at the station, she had a folder on her desk, her expression serious but determined. "We've made significant progress," she began, gesturing for them to sit. "Thanks to the evidence your investigator provided, we were able to confirm that Richard is involved in a large-scale money laundering operation. He's been embezzling funds from the bank for over 2 years and using shell companies to cover his tracks. The scope of his crimes is massive." Hearing it spelled out like that left her breathless. She had suspected he was hiding something, but the extent of his betrayal was staggering. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice shaky. "We've built a strong case against him," Detective Miller said. "We've already started monitoring his movements and we're preparing to make an arrest. But I need you to be careful. Once he realizes the net is closing in, he might try to contact you, or worse." She nodded, gripping the edge of her chair. "I won't let him get to me," she said, though deep down, she was terrified. As they left the station, Liam turned to her. "You're handling this incredibly well, Clara. I know it's not easy." "It's not," she admitted, "but I need to see this through. After everything he's done, I can't let him walk away." That evening, she sat alone in Liam's living room, staring out the window. Her mind wandered back to the beginning of her relationship with Richard. How could the man who once held her hand and promised her a lifetime of happiness be the same man who smashed a TV over her head and embezzled millions. The betrayal cut deeper than she could have imagined, but it also fueled her resolve. He had taken enough from her. It was time for him to face the consequences. The next few days were tense. She couldn't stop imagining what would happen when Richard was arrested. Would he lash out? Would he deny everything? Part of her dreaded the confrontation, but another part, one she barely recognized, wanted to see him brought down. Finally, the call came. Detective Miller informed them that Richard had been taken into custody earlier that morning. "He didn't resist," she said, her tone calm but firm. "But he's claiming innocence. He's saying it's all a misunderstanding." "Of course he is," she said bitterly. "That's what he's always done, pretend to be the victim." Despite his denial, she felt a weight lift off her shoulders. Knowing he was behind bars, even temporarily, gave her a sense of safety she hadn't felt in months. But she knew this was far from over. The next step was the court case, and she would have to relive everything to ensure he faced justice. As she prepared for the trial, memories of Richard haunted her. She remembered the way he'd look at her with disdain when she didn't meet his impossible expectations. She remembered the nights she cried herself to sleep, wondering why she wasn't enough for him, and she remembered the moment he threw her out bleeding and broken as if she were nothing. But those memories didn't break her. If anything, they made her stronger. She channeled her pain into determination, knowing she had to stand up, not just for herself but for anyone who had ever been made to feel powerless. The day of the trial arrived quickly. The courtroom was intimidating, with its high ceilings and rows of wooden benches. She sat with Liam, gripping his hand for support as Richard was brought in. He looked calm, almost smug, as if he believed he could talk his way out of this. But as the prosecution presented the evidence, the documents, the surveillance photos, the testimony from the investigator, she saw his confidence falter. When it was her turn to testify, she walked to the stand with shaky legs but a steady heart. She recounted everything: the abuse, the lies, the night he hit her with the TV. Her voice wavered at times, but she didn't stop. She refused to let him silence her again. Richard's defense tried to paint her as a bitter ex-wife seeking revenge, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. By the time the trial concluded, it was clear to everyone in the courtroom that he was guilty. The judge's verdict came swiftly. Richard was convicted on multiple counts of embezzlement, money laundering, and fraud. He was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison. As the gavel struck, she felt an immense sense of relief. He couldn't hurt her anymore. When the judge announced Richard's sentence 12 years in federal prison, a wave of emotions washed over her. Relief, disbelief, and even sadness mingled together. But one feeling stood out above the rest: freedom. For the first time in years, she felt like she could finally breathe. He couldn't hurt her anymore. He couldn't manipulate her, control her, or break her. Justice had been served. After the trial, Liam and Clara stepped outside the courthouse. The sun was shining, but she still felt heavy. It was as if the weight of everything she'd been through was just now sinking in. Liam placed a hand on her shoulder. "You did it, Clara," he said, his voice filled with pride. "You stood up to him." She nodded, her throat tight. "I couldn't have done it without you," she said. "You believed in me when I didn't believe in myself." The following weeks were a blur as Clara tried to piece her life back together. Moving forward wasn't as easy as she had imagined. The scars, both physical and emotional, from everything Richard had put her through were still there. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she would wake up, haunted by memories of his rage and violence. But with each passing day, she reminded herself that she was stronger than those memories. She had survived, and she was determined not to let him define who she was. One of the first steps toward healing was reclaiming her independence. Clara moved into a small apartment in downtown Seattle, not far from her office. It wasn't much, just a one-bedroom place with a tiny kitchen and creaky floors, but it was hers. Every piece of furniture she carefully chose, every picture she hung on the walls, felt like a declaration of the new life she was building. For the first time, she had a space that was completely her own, free from Richard's shadow. Work became another sanctuary. Clara immersed herself in her designs, finding peace in the creative process. Her boss, who had always been supportive, gave her opportunities to take on more significant projects, helping her regain her confidence. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments of self-doubt, where she questioned if she was capable, but with each new success, she proved to herself that she was. Through it all, Liam was her constant source of support. Whether bringing groceries or simply sitting with her on the couch, watching movies and chatting about anything but the past, Liam reminded her that she wasn't alone, and that made all the difference. One day, as Clara was organizing old papers, she came across a photograph from her wedding. In the picture, Richard was smiling at her, his arm around her waist. She stared at it for a long time, trying to reconcile the man in the photo with the one who had hurt her so deeply. After a while, she ripped the picture in half and threw it away. It felt symbolic, like she was finally letting go of the man she had once loved. But her healing wasn't about forgetting, it was about learning. She took time to reflect on everything she had endured, realizing just how much stronger it had made her. She had discovered a resilience within herself that she hadn't known existed. She had faced betrayal, humiliation, and immense pain and had come out the other side. She wasn't the same person she had been when she married Richard, but she was okay with that. The woman she had become was braver, wiser, and determined to never let anyone take away her power again. As for Richard, his sentencing rocked the community. His crimes made headlines, and the bank he had worked for publicly apologized for failing to catch his fraudulent activities sooner. Clara heard through the grapevine that Eleanor, his mother, had moved away, likely due to shame. Part of Clara wanted to confront her, to demand an apology for the way she had treated her. But she realized it wasn't worth it. Eleanor wasn't worth her energy. Her focus was on herself and the future she was building. One evening, Clara and Liam went out to dinner at a small Italian restaurant to celebrate. It wasn't a special occasion, just the two of them, but it felt significant. As they clinked glasses, Liam said, "To your freedom." "To my freedom," Clara echoed with a genuine smile. For the first time in a long while, it was a smile that came from a place of true peace. Now, as Clara reflects on her journey, she realizes how far she has come. What happened to her was horrific, but it didn't break her. It taught her that she deserves better, that she has a voice and the right to stand up for herself. Most importantly, it taught her that no matter how dark things may seem, there is always a way out. Richard may have thought he could control her forever, but he underestimated her. He underestimated the strength she had buried deep inside. Now, as she looks toward the future, she knows one thing for certain: she is free. Free to live, to dream, and to build a life on her own terms. And to her, that freedom is the greatest form of revenge